how can you tell, right? Most often the point of terrorist attacks, especially in CBRE nature, is to create confusion, to disrupt your daily living, and to really cause as much chaos as possible. So whilst you can see a lot of people running around for their lives or panicking, which is what they want as an outcome, there are also certain other identifiers that you might see. One of which is unusual clouds of vapor, smoke, or an unusual smell of fire. This is something that is most often observed upon the onset of the chemical agent attack or any of these attacks. On top of that, you will see a large number of victims without any obvious sign of injury. So people passing out, fainting, or even going unconscious. On top of that, if it's an explosive field, you may often see debris flying everywhere, or maybe even fires. And at the same time, if it's a multiple coordinated attack, you can have multiple locations and multiple devices and items that can set off these attacks. So chemical agents, what are they, right? They tend to be the deliberate release of hazardous chemical substances to kill, seriously injure, or incapacitate people. Oftentimes, these can be released in a variety of means. It can be as complicated as an automated bomb that will release things according to a timer, or even as simple as an unknown fluid with a punctured water bottle that's just left along. So it can range from something that is very, very suspicious or something that is completely inconspicuous that people may not even pay any heed to on a day-to-day basis. What are certain telltale signs that you can look out for? The presence of any objects emitting gas or vapor. Sometimes it might be colored, sometimes it might be not. But more often, you will also find some presence of an unusual odor. And if it is an outdoor release, which is less common, you might see a lot of sick or dead birds and small animals. Because of the size of how they are biologically, the effects of chemical agents tend to take on a lot faster. So on top of that, in closed areas, which is more often the case, you will see a lot of people suddenly experiencing symptoms of irritation, very watery eyes in the event of a chlorine gas attack, redness of skin, breathing difficulties, or nausea and vomiting and dizziness. So moving on to biological agents, they are slightly different and a lot less common to see for sure, because they are actually the deliberate release of biological agents such as viruses or bacteria. And these are often very, very contagious with a less acute onset of symptoms. So what this means is that you can be exposed to an agent and you may not even display any signs or symptoms until a week later, which is why it's so deadly. Think of COVID. That's a very good example. It's not necessarily an attack because it's just something that happened, but at a similar scale, someone introducing a biological agent of such destructive nature will function in the same way. It's via contagion. So what are the signs? Oftentimes it's unusual powdery or gel-like substances that are delivered to you. And you also witness a lot of unusual illnesses reported in the community. And again, like I mentioned, the symptoms are not often immediate, and the sudden exponential increase in patients seeking medical treatment is often also a sign of a biological threat that has been unleashed. So moving on to radiological agents, these often tend to be linked with explosive agents because they are known as dirty bombs. Again, like I mentioned earlier, it's about delivering damage as much as possible and using the explosive element as a method of delivery for your radiological threat. So these are meant to incapacitate and to kill people. And again, unlike chemical attacks, they tend to be, or explosive attacks, they tend to be a lot less long-term in terms of the symptoms and the ill effects to be observable. It's very similar to an explosion, of course. And often these are targeted towards the skin, eyes, and your respiratory systems as well. And you will also feel a lot of nausea and vomiting. So moving on to explosive threats, these tend to be a lot more common. Such examples would include the Boston Marathon bombing, the Bali bombs, which are thankfully not exactly in our shores, but at the same time quite close to home as well, especially for those that happen within the archipelago. So IEDs, or improvised explosive devices, are typically carried by person and they require someone to activate it. But what's most frightening about these are that the components are very easily obtainable. So what are signs that you can see? One of which is oily stains or discoloration on parcels or items that they're carrying. On top of that, you might hear or see smoke, odor, or very strange ticking or buzzing noise that is quite out of the norm. And on top of that, if we are not done very well, you can look for wires or aluminum foil or even batteries or watch timers.